Hey gang, it's Kevin here, Life22. I got the headset in tonight, and we are testing this out. Let's see how well this comes across as a live video, and also is a good review, a better review than what me and Paul had previously put out for the News Over Beers. I've got like 3 council meetings to catch up on. Plus, I also want to hit the diversity and inclusion committees. So what we're going to end up doing is we're hitting these meetings. I'm hitting these meetings. I made notes, and I've got the video to produce alongside of it. I don't want to leave you guys disappointed, so I figured this would be a better type of thing. Yeah, so here we go. So what we're doing is get out of here, high CPU usage. Boom. There we go. Boom. So we've got, look at that, the handsome John Crawford there. And Jack Hart, the city attorney, who is new, fresh as of January 1st. Tiffany Taylor in the background. We're going to start this. So for the first 30 seconds of the meeting, we've got it muted. Maybe we'll put it at half volume. Vernon Robinson calls Public Safety Committee.
2021. Let the record show all committee members are present, with the exception of Olean Gonzalez.
Yep. So Alderman Gonzalez is not here for public safety. They talk literally for the first 30 seconds.
Previous committee meeting Tuesday, July 20, 2021.
30 seconds to
I'll make a motion.
5 minutes.
Second.
They talk about a no parking sign being moved on Reed Street at like 12th or something. So yeah, literally nothing to see here. I mean, it's literally like a couple of the neighbors were bitching. If any of the neighbors want to come forward because they didn't get their voices heard, Alderman Vernon Robinson does say that he spoke to a few of them here in the meeting, and I'd like to, hey, if you don't think that he got the story right based on these, I'm not going to show you the whole thing. This is pretty dull, and this is pretty like boilerplate stuff for what they do on the council. Like I used to get tons of them. So. They start the meeting, they start the committee, the whole meeting at about 5 minutes in. We are going to flip right to that. Boom, look at that, exactly 5 minutes.
2021. Let the record show that all
we'll get more beers in all this.
Gonzalez, who's
So this is a long one. This is like
no
an hour and 17 minutes,
business.
this whole ordeal. But we're gonna go through and speed through to the highlights that I listened to today. I watched this meeting when like the day after it came out, and then I wanted to make sure that you guys got a better view of each and every one of these. So I did a good job, like making notes and things like that. So we're already fine.
Wondering where we were with setting up committee. And I questioned whether or not we even needed a committee. So my question to the council is if we are...
All right, so they're setting up a committee for murals. They're asking... They're asking if a committee needs to be set up to propose murals, and I think that was just the mayor's way of the mayor's way of just maintaining control. We have a strong mayor, a weak council form of government. So in order to change that and make it a strong council, a weak mayor, or no mayor like a CEO and a city manager, you would have to have you'd have to have a charter change, and a charter change is a whole ordeal. And then the mayor decided to not have it comes up here in a minute, maybe it wasn't the way for us to do. The council essentially is what regulates the city property. The mayor essentially sends the city employees out to utilize the city property both for maintenance purposes and to utilize it as a tool to accomplish the goals of the Common Council. The goals of the Common Council are to run the city, right? Like maintain the roads so people can drive on them. But essentially, if you want a parking sign, you want to put a mural up, anything like that, essentially the council has to give you permission for it. If it was hey, the city owns a lawnmower and you want permission to use it, essentially you'd have to go to the council for that. But the mayor, because it is city property and the purpose of it being purchased is to mow the lawns of the city, then the city would enact its employees in that regard to operate those types of things. So that's essentially like the checks and balances of the city. And so here they're talking about murals, and they're going back and forth, and literally from here until from 5 minutes and 45 seconds into the 10-minute mark, they're discussing murals. And
if they are interested in doing it, and we can.
so here's where the mayor, kind of like says, hey, I don't want this, and I think it's really, I don't know. This is
Well, if I may speak, number one, we don't need a committee.
see, they don't need a committee, right? The mayor just wanted to put that out there just to make recommendations to save the council time from doo-doo. The council gets a lot of like recommendations and stuff like that. So hey, is a mural committee, or like, hey, why don't you just
honestly,
bring it forward?
I tend to agree with Mayor Elio. I think we are a committee along with the mayor. We are each representatives of our wards.
I'm gonna get some beer. I'll let you guys listen to this section real quick, and I'll be back.
With the upkeep of our parks in our city areas, so I think that's a great idea. We make it be known that we're accepting applications or letters of interest, a design concept. I would rather see something get done in a tasteful way. Obviously, we have the ability to say, no, that's not quite what we're looking for, right? But at the same time, I think working alongside with you guys, I think this is the body that can make those decisions. And, maybe we come up with a strategy or, something we would like to see, but let's see what ideas are out there.
And then
One for you and one for me, boys and girls.
I know.
All right, so as you can tell, you can kind of hear what they're already talking about, right? Like, all right, they didn't talk about everything. You guys can listen to the council meetings. They are up on the City of Olean's website. That was a good opportunity for me to... Oh, yeah. I feel... Dude, there was two brothers I was listening to doing a podcast yesterday. It was great. And now I'm drawing a blank on who they are. It wasn't the Jonas Brothers. It was two brothers... And they were like, yeah, oh, yeah. They had a lot of like beer krakens and things like that. They were a great pair. Anyways, so I made some notes here. So essentially, like, let's not make any of these murals political, right? Like, I'm gonna get in a lot of trouble for this, but George Floyd was not a saint. Should he have died? No. Like, was what happened to him horrible? Yes. Like, bad shit happens to people, right? Like, but he wasn't a saint, right? We always withhold his, like, criminal record. Like, I don't want a mural of George Floyd in the downtown Olean area, right? Like, because he has nothing to do with Olean. So, let's make it not political. Like, I don't want a picture of a group of mayors, right? Like, oh, these are the last 20 mayors. Like, well, yeah, that's still subjective. Why don't we, like even the tile thing on the side of the municipal building is not truly political. It's got like a group of things that like show in our area, right? Like, only in New York is one of the first places where they tested cable television. Like, the railroads came through here, right? Like, we were one of the test cities for welfare. I mean, I wouldn't be supporting that. I wouldn't be promoting that. Like, yeah, we were a test. Yay. It's like, hey, we're the city where they tested nuclear bombs. Like, my brother Bob's got 6 legs. Like, we don't need to be promoting stuff like that, but like, let's keep it not political, right? Let's talk about how beautiful the Enchanted Mountains are, right? Let's talk about some good stuff with Olean. Let's not be political, like low COVID numbers and high mask rates, and like, no, none of that. No, let's keep murals like timeless, right? Like the opposite of what for Richmond, is it Richmond? Whatever, Virginia, where they just tore down the Robert E. Lee statue and then like didn't even tell anybody what was in the time capsule, and then threw away everything that was in the time capsule, and then like after they chucked it out, they put in a bunch of like crazy nonsense into a new time capsule, like America was based on racism, 1619 Project, like a bunch of like what? That has nothing to do with like modern day, like we all hate life. Like, no, we don't. I love life. Life is amazing. And I don't need this political crap put in a time capsule. Like, let's put like a little girl drawing a picture of like her favorite pony. You know what I mean? Like just things that make sense, like things that I don't know, like a draft of the Constitution showing people in the future that we're still following it. We opened up this one time capsule and we added to it, like with another time capsule inside of a time. You know, like I don't know that a mural should be like a time capsule. It should not be political. Like try to like be non-biased. Like try to just like fundamentals and values for the group of people that you're doing today, and like because those people aren't expecting you to like open it up, be like, this is garbage, they're all racist, and just chuck it out. Like, psh, boom. A mural, like I don't want to sit there and see a bunch of garbage for the next 200 years. I want to see something that represents our area. It has nothing to do with politics. It has nothing to do with racism. It has nothing to do with any of that stuff. It has to do with how great our country is. You know, current times prevailing, right? Like, okay. And then, so let's keep it not political. And then the kids, they have it. Linda brings up like what Vernon brought up originally, which is let's have the high school kids like decorate the tunnel going into the stadium from the locker rooms over at the War Vets Park Rec Center. Let's do that. Let's do that. But like let's also like see some drafts and designs of what they plan on doing, right? Like don't just give them a pen and just write what they want, because that could get back to like what I stated the first time. Like let's not let it get political, right? Like there was some pretty good valedictorians that were speaking like across the country at the last graduation in June, and like one of the smartest girls in the country just all of a sudden like made her entire valedictorian speech about abortion. It was like, what are you talking about? Like, why? That's not even pertinent. I don't know. But so like let's like yeah, the kids can bring us forth some some sketches, and let's do it. Let's go Huskies. Let's go, let's go football. Like yeah. And knowing that some kids like from Olean did that, like yeah, let's do it. Let's show some pride in our area, and let's show some like respect. Let's do something tasteful, but let's keep politics out of it. I really just want but reviewing some of the stuff, and that's where like the mayor wanted to put a committee together. Like I don't think you just like say, hey kids, you just go do what you want to do, and then they just they just write what they want to, because like. If I was in high school, if some teacher was just like, you have permission from the city to write whatever you want on here, there would be like, it would be like super bad. There would just be like a wiener hanging there, like for no reason, like people crying, like it would just be a mess. It would be a horrible mess. And that's like, let's keep it tasteful, people. So at the 10-minute mark, all right, here folks, we're getting to the 10-minute mark. The 10-minute mark, they talk about something that's very vital and important to me, which is the CRB.
Applications or
So the 10-minute mark, they start talking, hammering down about.
This is a follow-up. Really, it's our preliminary kickoff on the civilian review board.
Civilian Review Board, the CRB.
So some of this is going to be redundant to some of you. Obviously, the aldermen, we've all...
So, John's saying it's going to be redundant. And this is him trying to preempt Vernon Robinson, who sat with me on the police reform committee to see if there was a need to reform in the police department, to come up with different things. So now what happens is the police reform committee was split down the middle. Like you had a bunch of people that said like the entire police force was woke or was needed to be woken up and dismantled and torn apart, and you had a group of people like me. So there was a group of people like Vernon that said it was all racist and it needs to be like reformed. And there was a group of people like me that said there's other things we can critique. There's always things you can critique. We're human beings, right? Like I struggle every day. I'm taking jiu-jitsu classes. I stop drinking every few months. Like, I try to keep certain things in check. Some things are constant battles in life. I don't think racism is a constant battle that we have here in Olean. I think that there's people that are racist. Yeah, sure. Shit, yeah, there are. They're like, it ain't. Those people no longer control our society as of like 1960s, right? Like Martin Luther King, like he washed those people out. You know what happened was Martin Luther King died, and all the people he tried to separate himself from, not the white supremacists, he tried to separate himself from the nationalists. There were black nationalists that like were the complete opposite. They were like black supremacists. And they like, so he was like, listen, I'm just trying to find middle ground here, folks. And now what happened was like mainstream media always takes like what was and goes polar opposite. Boom, boom. We're going the opposite of this crap. And then like now all of a sudden it's like you're racist if you aren't black. And that's what's going on. And we need to stop that. Like this shit's ridiculous. Anyways, we don't need to be punishing officers who are just trying to enforce laws that are put forth by U.S. citizens. And sorry about that, folks. You guys hate this. Call you soon. In a minute. Boom. So, anyways, they're talking about, so Vernon's on this committee. I'm no longer on this committee. I stepped down because they were tearing it apart, and then shortly thereafter I took a job with the city. And for those of you who don't know, I gave everything that I like firmly believe in, and it has nothing to do with racism. Okay. It has nothing to do with people just go, Kevin was racist. Like, no, I'm not racist. I'm furthest thing from racist. I hate the fact that we just throw these words around like Nazi, Hitler, racist, right? Like those white supremacists. Like, all right, I did everything that I firmly believe, right? Like whether, like if you're a good Christian, you believe that you should do all your beliefs and bring them forward in your life. If you're a good human being, you should bring that forward. If you're a good, whatever you think that you should be doing, you do. That's part of humanity. I'm a good person, and I fought and died for this city. I fought and would die for this city, and I gave my all to this city, and I continue to give my all to this city. My kids live in this city. My kids go to the school district. My kids are, like, we all live here. I give a shit about my kids being in this city and, like, having them. Holy smokes, people need to stop texting me. I'm going to set this over here so it doesn't make that noise on the microphone. I give a shit about the city, and I gave as much as I could, and it's like, if I could give back the $3,500 a year, like peanuts, because I was putting in 20, 30 hours a week being alderman, taking away from my family to give to the city. Okay, now I go work for the city for 40 hours a week. I do everything. Like, I'm saving the city so much money by doing what I'm doing. I initially went in and knocked out their HVAC contract and their plumbing contract, saving the city about $250,000 a year, and then you should be back out my salary, which is less than 50. And the city's making $160,000 on what I'm saving them just on those aspects. Okay, so boom. All right. Anyways, we got in a tangent there. So I'm giving my all for this city, and I go day in and day out, and I make sure that nothing breaks on the city. I'm preventative maintenance. I'm going above and beyond. I'm fixing gates for the fire department. I'm doing all sorts of stuff that, whatever, like doing what I'm supposed to do. Giving my all for my city. Now, Alderman Crawford here references that Vernon needs to, or he's referencing that this might seem redundant. Well, that's what happens. You join an advisory committee, right? So, like, the Police Reform Committee was an advisory committee to the Common Council. And essentially, it's not really how the Common Council does business typically. In the last 5 years that I was there, we never did stuff like, you'd have advisory committees, parking committees, people, you bring in, you join the fleet management, right? And you would go over with, like, the mayor and his mechanics and the DPW director and a bunch of, other people in the city, the fire department, police department, and you'd go through their fleets, and you would just you're just like oversight, like it was just a advisory committee, and they would make recommendations to the Common Council on, like, hey, we need to replace 2 police cars this year. And then the police were pretty easy, like every year you replace 2 cop cars, every 5 years you replace 3. Every 5 years you replace an ambulance. Every 10 years you replace a fire truck. Like, it was pretty standard. Like, snowplow trucks, you should get, 10, 15 years out of them. But they're high wear and tear vehicles. Sometimes, like, the maintenance gets a little up there when you get closer to the deadlines. There's just a lot of stuff that happens with these vehicles. So you're like, okay, well, all right, let's break, so you're an advisory committee. Okay, so, like, you can sit there and make recommendations and stuff like that, and you go over stuff and you tear into it a little bit, and, like, that's how these are. Then they go to the Common Council, and then they get re-dissected, and then those get, like, police cars sometimes get thrown out, body cams get thrown out, replacement radios get thrown out. Not typically, but a lot of times they can. We've had extra snowplow vehicles and stuff like that, or fire trucks get thrown out for a playground, and a lot of times playgrounds get thrown out. Like, you're gonna replace the playground, or are you gonna have a new fire truck? Like, well, fire trucks save lives. Kids can play on the old playground equipment. Like, there's a balance, right? So that makes sense. It's an advisory committee. Vernon Robinson, ever since I've noticed that he's been on a lot of these committees, he's like, well, we already talked about this in committee, and so I keep noticing that, and it's frustrating for me to see him be frustrated with the committees, and it's just like, that's how it works. That's how it works, man. Welcome to government. Like, you ain't changing it. Like, how are you gonna change it? What do? You gotta overthrow the entire United States government, and then hope that somebody else doesn't come around with a worse idea, and then build it back down brokener, right? Like, that's it. Like, essentially, you're just breaking legs, and then, like, now you're in crutches for a little bit, and then you walk, and essentially all you're doing is helping the healing process. And that's what government kind of turned into, which sucks. Like, I wish it could be better, but how are you gonna make it better? It isn't gonna, like, it's just, you're at the low end of the totem pole. Like, you're the high end. Like, you can't, you're not gonna do anything at this level. Like, you have very little power. So, like, your frustration to the rest of us that have been there is just, like, annoying. And that's, like, John's trying to curb that, being like, I know this sounds redundant to everybody, and then, like, and then here it comes, right? Like, so now they talk about the CRB.
We've talked about this previously. Some of this might be redundant, but I'm trying to do my best to be transparent and give information to our community as well. So one of the major takeaways out of the police reform committee that the mayor and
So
a
they
number
break
of
it.
residents from the city.
He's talking about the 3 different modules that, like,
was
Googleable.
interest in creating what is called a civilian review board.
The Civilian Review Board is something that would review the police department. So the Civilian Review Board reviews the police department and essentially breaks them down, like, and takes the power away from the taxpayer. This is my biggest thing. This is my biggest gripe about the Civilian Review Boards when it comes to the police department. They can be an advisory board, right? Like, you don't think the government is listening to you. You think that the city is just, like, taking your complaints and throwing them in a trash can. Okay. I'm on board for giving you a group of citizens that are somewhat passionate about making sure that your concerns are not unfounded, and then making sure that they follow through the process. I am not on board with this board being autonomous and being able to fire cops or threaten to fire cops, and essentially doing what happened in the 1940s with the communists, and they actually were they were trying to institute these boards to be able to essentially threaten cops and be like, listen, you got to better listen to us over your boss, because we have more right to fire you than your boss does. And that's kind of what happened. And I'm not for that. There's a lot of things that I can get behind, and I can get behind your concerns. Like, you don't want to come forward, you want to go to a representative of one of these boards, and they have your affidavit, or a written complaint from you, but it doesn't have to be released to the officers, the cops. You don't have to worry about any, and then, like, a lot of what we're talking about is like fictitious. Like, you think that a cop is going to find out that you filed a complaint and is going to attack you, right? Like, but that ain't the case. But your fear is why this board exists. Your fear of something that does not exist, right? Like, it's almost being like a hypochondriac. Like, I'm afraid of being a diabetic. Like, do you drink any soda or any, like, added sugars? No, I eat vegan. I do everything that I'm supposed to do. Then why are you afraid of being diabetic? The guy who's diabetic is the guy who drinks 18 pops a day, and, like, he wonders why he's diabetic. Like, I had to switch to Diet Pepsi, which is way worse than making me diabetic. Anyways, getting off track. I mean, that's why this board is supposedly existing, and I can get behind, like, the fact that a lot of people are afraid. A lot of people are afraid for no apparent reason. Like, they don't understand that they shouldn't fear anything but fear itself. But what happens is they think that there's all these fears that should exist because Hollywood tells them, the mainstream media tells them to do something, and then they believe it. And it's like, okay, well, great. Well, let's break it down then. Let's give you this little board, and then they can do that, right? But they're not going to fire cops. They're not going to be able to be autonomous. They're not going to be a government amongst, like, separate, like, created by elected body, separate and unrestrained by that elected body. So they're like the EPA or OSHA, where you can't rein them in. Like, OSHA's allowed to do whatever it wants. Congress told OSHA to do what they want. Like, and now Congress can't rein them in unless they retract that law. And the courts are just like, marginal indifference, I'm out, and we're not regulating it. And then they get to regulate themselves, and that's how you get away from democracy, is letting some group of unelected people do what the hell ever they want. Boom. So that's my piece on it. So they ramble on about how the Civilian Review Board is broken down into 3 different methods, or 3 different, like, there's 3 different types, and Crawford goes into this, like, Google definition of, like, how it can be set up. And let's see here, I have how it's handled at the 20-minute mark.
Ultimate goal you're learning about, and
So at the 20-minute mark,
or if it comes directly to me or the mayor, then I'll look into it.
so the police chief needs to start talking more into that microphone down here. Oh shit! I can't even point to it. Damn it!
And just as a follow-up to that, Chief, is there currently a policy in place within the city based on,
how it's handled?
Again, and I'm sure that we're going to run into a lot of hypotheticals, but, like, how do we know whether Captain Marsfelder investigates it, or maybe a lieutenant, or yourself, or is there anything that identifies who's doing the investigation?
There's really not a policy on that. Just kind of, it's the way that it's always been. If it comes in on an afternoon crew, could be the sergeant on the afternoon.
So if there's an issue with the police officer, right, like muscling somebody around or doing something like that, it just gets handled.
Follow up with me.
If they don't, if,
All right,
if
so
you have an
it
issue with the
essentially
police
you
department, you
make
follow up
amendments.
with the police
I get-
chief, right? Like you follow up with the superior. If you don't know how the hierarchy works, you go right to the police chief. If you don't like how the police chief handles it, and he talks about this in the next like 2.5 minutes, you go and talk to the mayor, and the mayor is the commander in chief. He's the one who reins in the fire department, the police department, things like that. Like that's how you handle it. If you're not assertive and you don't want to do that, like the problem is that like the meek will inherit the earth, and the problem is that like we can't like create government systems that like the weakest amongst everybody. Like nobody should be beat up upon. This is America. So like you rely on other citizens to handle shit for you. Like if any of my neighbors were like, I'm too much of a wussy to go do this, like guess what? If I wasn't your neighbor, like I'll go handle it. But if I wasn't your neighbor, like I'd go tell you to kick bricks and you go handle it yourself, and now it forces you to not be a wussy. You gotta not be a wuss to handle stuff. Like if you're an adult in the world, like if you're 5 years old, you can be a wussy because you're 5. You're not 5 years old. You're an adult. So you should handle shit like an adult. You should be an adult. I'm sorry that everybody has coddled you and has not cut the apron strings, but that's how the world works. So anyways, getting into
That's
that,
fine.
and then I've got another
Take it
one here,
from-
foils at
Well, then,
the...
once the investigation starts, I keep the mayor in the loop as to.
So yeah, then you call the mayor, right? So at 2.5 mark,
Each state has its own policies and procedures on what can be presented to the public. So I guess we would have to look to see what New York's policy is.
so you can
what
foil.
would fall under Taylor's law and the collective bargaining agreement to find out what would be,
oh, that's what I have
able
written
to
down.
be let
2:23.
out to the public.
This is where Vernon starts
in
getting
certain
angry.
situations.
I'd be glad
Because
to
he's getting frustrated. He has to repeat
report
stuff.
back in 2 weeks.
Thank you.
So, I mean, I imagine, you know, if we end up with this committee that exists out of it, and we're bringing other people in, they end up, you know, where they sign a contract or some kind, right, to confidentiality when it's required.
That's been discussed there in the meeting.
That's been discussed in committee.
Will it be in the minutes? I can check out and see
It
what
should
it
be.
is.
Like, all right, so you shouldn't have to put that back into committee. Like, all right, it was discussed in committee. Like, well, yeah, but these guys aren't part of the committee. You have to re-break it down for them. Like, and he argues about that later on in this meeting, and he says like, if my wife would question my ability, my memory, I can remember all this stuff. Well, guess what? They're like, I guess that's the best part about being me is I remember all this stuff. Like, I remember it all, and I remember birthdays and stuff like that. And some things fall through the cracks, and guess what? You know, sometimes you gotta own a missed birthday or something. But you don't sign up for a responsibility like this and be like, it was in committee, you should read the minutes. Like, because these people aren't gonna read the minutes. You have to hand them everything like on a silver plate. Like, if you're the person trying to push legislation, you better have the legislation being able to be spoon-fed to each and every one of these individuals. And if you can't do that, don't be frustrated with them, because guess what? You're not going to get shit passed. Like, that's... And I think that's where the CRB is going to be fall flat on its face. I think it's going to fall flat on its face because it's being spoon-fed. It's not being spoon-fed. It needs to be spoon-fed to these people that are... They have to deal with 1,000 other categories of legislation every year, other complaints, mostly parking and bullshit stuff, and then they have lives and families of their own, and like, if you've got a passion, like, you can't expect each and every one of these people to be passionate for your shit, because like, it ain't gonna happen. And that's where I'm passionate in the opposite direction. I'm passionate that this shit don't pass, because I don't think that the way that they're pushing this, I think it's gonna undermine the democracy of our small town. Like, it's wickedly brutal legislation. So anyways, at the so there's foils, and then Vernon starts getting angry, and then Alderman Panis brings up abuse by the public at the 28-minute mark.
Complain of something or some
28-minute mark and 25 second.
And they use this review board to throw a wrench in the mix, or to try and either just use up the city's time because they feel wrong in some way.
That was discussed also.
What sort of ways can you deal with that? Was anything talked about how to deal with those issues?
Yeah, that was mentioned in the meetings, that was discussed, it was brought up by one of the, members, and, I can't remember all of the details, but I do remember, the chief mentioning that, you know, there's such thing as, making a false report. So, that's a deterrent in itself. If you're gonna come forward with a complaint, it should be a legitimate complaint. So, if you, are coming forward with something that is not legit, then, you know, you face the consequences. So,
Right, so before the chief speaks here, let's talk about that. Like, then why the hell do we need a civilian review board? Other than, like, people that are too much of wusses to come forward and complain on their own, right? Like, let's talk, like, okay, so there's things in the works that already, like, and we'll find out in a future meeting, like, almost everything that they talk about regulating are already crimes. Everything that they have under their jurisdiction is a crime. So why the hell are we trying to, well, we're gonna decriminalize. We're gonna criminalize these people. Like, they're already, if they're committing these things, they're already crimes, and there's already a method in which to get them out or get them exposed. Like, there's no, this isn't like some Hollywood 16 blocks, the most deaf witnessed a murder type bullshit. Like, and that's, and so now the chief's gonna speak here.
File a formal complaint. You know, if it was a formal complaint of something or some substance, then we would want to take a deposition from them, potential criminal charges. You know, we want them to be telling us the truth, sign it on account of their person.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's something reasonable for us to keep in mind, whether it's, and again, I don't know if that has to be spelled out within the policy, the creation of the civilian review board.
You don't
or
have
if
to
it's something
spell it
that's
out,
already
John.
in
So do
place within, you know, you can't file a false report.
You shouldn't have to reference
you have
other laws
something that
already in
says
the
you
books.
can't
You don't have to
file a false
you don't have to
complaint.
recreate the wheel.
Right.
We should also talk about that baby rape shouldn't be
That's a
illegal.
valid
Like,
point. I don't
why?
know how it's
Baby rape
structured.
isn't legal. Like, you don't have to reference it in something that has nothing to do with it, or something that has to slightly do with it.
As far as this,
Here it comes.
You know, when you talk about a civilian review board, I mean, there, like you said, you mentioned 3 different styles, but yet, whenever it's mentioned, everyone always jumps into this investigative aspect. And that's the part that's kind of been frustrating for me. There's a lot of aspects of this, and we've incorporated actually all 3 into this one. And it's like everybody jumped right past the first 10 pages and got to page 13. You know, I'm just making up a number, but it seems like that's what we're doing here. And it, I mean, I know we're unstructured right now, but I mean, we should be going head to toe and not jumping in the middle and the what ifs and this and that. A lot of questions that.
So right here, I made a note at the 30 minute and 30 second mark that Vernon's mad that we've already talked about this. Well, guess what? We're going to keep talking about this. Everything that you went over in that committee, you have to be able to bring back. Well, you don't have to talk about stupid bullshit that was brought up in that committee. You just have to bring forward everything else that you think it has meat and potatoes to back your argument on why this has to exist. So, like, to take the stance of you don't give one shit one way or another, like, you have to be able to sell yourself. If you can't sell yourself, like, and just say, well, we've already talked about this. Well, guess what? That shit don't cut it. No one's going to fucking argue with you. No one's going to sit there and say, oh, they've already talked about it. Okay, here you go. Take it. Oh, we'll vote yes then. I'm sorry. I didn't realize you already talked about it. Like, that shit don't fly. And so, it just irks me a little bit that this whole thing is going down this way.
Well, repentance has, it should be in minutes, should be.
And then, the whataboutism, right? Like, what ifs? Guess what? That's their job, is to what if this and what if that. the whataboutism, the shit that the mainstream media argues about on a regular basis, the whataboutisms. Guess what? That's their job, is to check and balance, the devil's advocate on everything that you are presenting. That is what it is. That's your job.
If anyone else has any questions, I'm pretty sure any of that stuff is there. We discussed all of this already. So this is kind of repetitious. But yeah, it seems that, yeah, we're just jumping the gun a little bit.
John, could I
Alderman Witt.
I just have, just sitting here listening to everybody, have we ever heard back from the recommendations we sent to New York State?
Now, Linda, you're talking about New York State. What about that? No, yeah, New York State doesn't give a shit. They just want to make sure you had a plan, and Bill will talk about that in just a second. And we're going to skip on through to the 46.5-minute mark. Sorry, I'm scrolling, folks. There we go.
And then we can send that list of questions.
46 and a half. Bloop, 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 bloop.
We can send those off to him.
Okay.
Members of the committee, how this works for the city. Okay.
So at this point, do we even want to consider what the membership looks like, or you're suggesting?
So at the 46.5-minute mark, they're talking about what they want for a committee. So what's going on is the committee is made up of members of the city of Olean, appointed by each alderman. There's 2 appointments per each alderman, or 1 appointment for each alderman, and then 2 for the mayor. So the 2 for the mayor would be legitimate. So here's the problem: is the city charter states that all committee members must be all committee members of the city or of any committee. Sorry, if a committee is created of all council members, it's a council committee versus a mayoral committee. So there's 2 different groups, right? Any council committee, essentially the appointments typically are by the common council president. Unless the committee was set up with different rules, essentially like 2/3 of the council has to approve the appointments of said committees, yada yada. But the council's typically the only ones that create committees, unless the mayor has to create committees in order to get his job done, right? The executive branch of government. That's where executive orders come from. And so like he created the parking committee and the fleet management committee and things like that weren't part of the council. But the council can create mayoral committees, like the task force, right? The neighborhood task force essentially was a neighborhood watch, but they didn't want to call them neighborhood watch. They like the word task force because they're all stuck in 2001, right? Like where we have to have a task force against terror, and like that's. So they wanted a task force. I don't know. I don't know. It's like a trigger word. Anyways, so they created a task force, and what happens is the task force, if it has anybody other than committee or council members on it, it has to be appointed by the mayor. So even the council members that are on it. Now, the council, when creating such a committee, can say, well, we want 2 members of this, 1 member from every ward and 2 council members and the mayor can be on the mayoral committee. And boom, ta-da, like they can set the rules for the committee, but the mayor gets to appoint. Now, this is where it gets a little dicey, and now the council can set it up however they want to. The mayor gets to appoint if it's a mayoral committee, but you can also set the parameters. So those same parameters should also account to, well, we want each alderman to recommend 2 or 3 appointees to the mayor from each ward to represent the city, and the mayor has to pick one from each recommended list, at which point the mayor has 3 people to approve from in each ward, and that, or less, and then the mayor has to, like, if you give him, like, yeah, I couldn't find 3 in my ward, I got 1. Here you go, mayor. And he picks the one guy. He's got to pick the one guy because the rules of that committee were created stating that you have to go off of the list of the recommended aldermen, or the council, and the council recommended how the structure of the appointment. So the mayor makes the appointment. Now you can do a checks and balances and say, like, listen, we also want to ratify with majority vote of the council that the city, like the mayor's appointments. Well, okay, well that can also be added. Those are things that can be added to essentially restrict the mayor's power in a mayoral appointment, but at the same time, it's still a mayoral appointment, and everybody's getting hung up on this. They're like, we don't care. And so literally they go in, where was this? This is at the 46.5-minute mark. So, yeah, so 46, 48.5, 46.5, 46 and 3/4 minutes. They're bitching about this, and essentially, like, nobody's addressing the elephant in the room that the mayor is like, the mayor gets to a point. You're not rewriting the charter. You're gonna rewrite the charter, and I think Jack Hart brings that up like twice in this whole ordeal. Like, are you guys rewriting the charter? Because if we're rewriting the charter, this is going to take 4 years to pass. Like, it takes 4 years. You have to create a charter commission, and then it has to go for a referendum at the at-large, which means the entire city has to ratify such a change. And, like, the charter commission is putting together a list of changes that is then ratified by the council before it's even put to a... It's a huge deal to do a charter change. And if you're doing a charter change, you don't just do it for one thing like a civilian review board. You do it for a whole bunch of stuff. Like, are you going to go from a city mayor to a city manager, at which point you would make you'd make a CEO, essentially a city manager in charge, and then the mayor would still exist but be an at-large council member, and you'd reduce the council by 1, at which point you would reduce the wards from 7 to 6. And, like, that's a huge deal. Like, would you do that? Because that's a huge deal. I would, you might do that for a charter change all at once, but you wouldn't do it for a civilian review board. And then but you'd still add a bunch of other crap you wanted to have changed. Like, the last time the charter was changed, they added the zoning board. The zoning board was a charter change. Like, there's a lot of things that they added in charter changes. Like, they just... depends on who's wielding the power. And the last few mayors that were supposed to have charter commissions kiboshed them because they realized what kind of power they had as a mayor. They ain't giving up that shit. They always try to run for a second or third term, and they don't do that. Hey, I'm not saying we don't need a charter change. I'm just saying that, like, you can't argue with the facts. Like, people don't like to give up power. That's reality. So, anyways, we're gonna skip over this next part. We're gonna get done with this real quick. So at the 57-minute mark, so they literally bitch about this for about 10 minutes. They go back and forth talking about different committees and yada yada, and boom, 57 minutes.
Something's a little, I'm not getting there, or it's a little off.
Right, there's a vacancy, it would be filled according to sections 1, 2, and 3, but they can fill so it's basically giving them instruction. They're filling the void, but they're gonna do it according to B1, 2,
So
and
they
3.
would go, like, back to an alderman request that they need a vacancy filled, is that how you?
Nope.
No, they would appoint it, but so when they go to 1, they're gonna go to 1 with the intent that that person is gonna fill the ward for what X amount of years. If they went to 2, the candidate had to be a 2-year resident, and if they went to 3, then,
Okay.
3.
So basically, after the initial, the alderman appointment, the appointments go away, it becomes the board sustaining, so.
Correct.
The board establishes its own term limits, and we'll talk about this in a future meeting because I've watched them all. The future meeting will talk about how much more autonomous this board will get. And then here we go. Like this whole shit show starts unraveling a little bit more. So like they talk about how it's going to be autonomous, and then right here, 58 minutes and 50 seconds.
For reference there, I guess.
Steve Barnard, my replacement
I don't know.
on the council.
Are there any thoughts on that?
I got one. Why are we comparing Olean, New York City, Chicago, and Baltimore? The population's
Look at Vernon's
10,
face. He's
15
laughing his ass. He's like
times
smirking, like.
that's my question. Why
And here
are
he
we
comes for a response.
comparing Olean to Chicago, New York, Baltimore?
So that question was brought up in the Reform and Reinvention Committee, and it's, I was gonna say it was ironic that John was referencing all of these big cities when it was like taboo to even mention Rochester or New York City or something. The fact is there are other cities, smaller cities that have civilian review boards. Each one is structured differently. Each one consists of either or all of these different models. Some are picked by mayors, some are picked by council, so it really is structured to how they want it. And one of the most popular quotes during our meeting was that we want to make this Oleans, we want to tailor it to Oleans. So, and I think Alderman Crawford said it earlier in this meeting, we want to make it Oleans. So here we are, as Alderman, we're going to make it Oleans. So
We're just showing out more of his frustration. I'm not trying to specifically pick on Alderman Robinson. It's just that me and Vernon butt heads on this particular issue. When I gave grievance against like the entire civilian review board, and I would like halt on the, like we get along on a lot of other topics, like hunting and like men should be men and things like that. We talk about a lot. We did talk about a lot of those things, and like we get along on a lot of those. Are like people should own guns. Like there's like we get along on a lot of topics. We don't get along on this one, and that's the only reason that I'm like I might be beating up on him more on this issue in general, and like pointing out, because he's the one that's for it, I'm the one that's against it. And this channel has never been about bipartisanship. I'm not bipartisan. Like this is my take on the world, right? This is the Kevin show, right? Like this is what this is about. So like if I don't agree, like I mean, change my mind. Steven Crowder me, right? Like change my mind. Give me something to like I'll agree with you, and then I'll be on the show like spitting Vernon rhymes. Like I'll hey, he's my dude. Ram bam, shik shoo bam. Like that's, but like I can't get behind him on this. And especially after one of the council, or after one of those civilian review, like one of our police reform committee meetings, and he was like, I can't believe you said that, blah, blah, blah. People dropped their jaws, and we would have whooped, if we were in person, not on Zoom, we would have whooped your ass. Like, it's not, like, I don't threaten to beat the shit out of anybody after a meeting. Like, I might disagree wholeheartedly, and the next day, I will buy them, I will drink a beer with them and be like, that was yesterday, right? Like, we're people, and we believe in each other. That's how dissent works. That's how differing opinions works. That's how conversations go. I can conversate about something you don't like. You change the conversation. You can argue your points. You can do whatever the hell you want to do. I don't hate anybody. I want to say that's the one thing that I love about me. I don't hate anybody. I don't hate people. I'll argue. I will argue with people, but I don't hate anybody. And I will be civil with everybody. I will be civil with my worst enemy. But I might not be civil with somebody who like somebody broke into my house and law-abiding citizen to my family or something, like murdered my family and kids or something. Like I might not be civil with you, but those are far and few between circumstances. That's an anomaly, right? That doesn't happen every day. I argue with you about certain things. That's it. Like, we just argue, and then the next day we're buddy. Like, that's how shit works. That's how the world works. Like, fuck, grudges are for fucking idiots. Don't be an idiot, I guess. So anyways, I'm not trying to pick on him, but yeah. So like, New York City, Olean, they just kept bringing all this stuff up, and we can't talk about it. It's taboo. It's taboo. Like, it wasn't taboo when we were talking about it in the meetings. So a minute and three. Here's our back-to-back special. So we're at the 1 hour mark, and we're gonna go to the 1 hour and
Not necessarily a referendum.
3 minute mark.
18 years of age or older are eligible.
Talking about
there is
the
a residency requirement
requirements.
to be a candidate for the board in the ward where they reside, without regard to sex, race, ethnicity, religion, creed,
Member
national
requirements.
origin, immigration status, political views, union membership, sexual orientation, gender identity and expression, record of criminal conviction and incarceration, or physical ability.
None of these things will be discriminated against.
Persons who are currently employed by the city of Olean Police Department
Here's the exemption.
are, or
So they won't discriminate against you because of your color, race, gender.
of an OPD employee, or who were employed by OPD are not eligible to be candidates or to serve as board members.
Okay.
No member of the board shall be a city of Olean official or employee.
Okay. Gets the rest of them.
These community members shall be diverse, inclusive,
Get
and
yours truly out of it.
of the marginalized community.
Oh, so all of them. That's okay. So I love that. That's my favorite. I wrote that down too. So all the other ones were membership requirements, like you shall be a member if you are here for 2 years and you're over the age of 18 and blah 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 blah, and you shall not be discriminated against for being of any gender, race, creed, religion, anything, unless you're a member of the police department, unless you're a city employee or an elected official. Okay, that's fine. You can't be a civilian if you're a member elected official, so I guess that would, like, okay. And then it said, like, all members must be of a marginalized, that was a word he just used. Anyways, you should be marginalized, be of a marginalized community. Well, wait a minute. I thought that we weren't discriminating against anybody on any different community. Like, you could be white, black, Asian, Puerto Rican, you could be a goddamn Martian, for all we give a shit. You have to live in the ward for 2 years. You don't even have to be a U.S. citizen. You just live in the ward. Like, you could be a gardener who just came here. They're like, yeah, don't speak English, just came here. Maybe you came from Martian, you just landed and meteor split open and you were like, hey, I'm here. 2 years later, you registered to vote and shit. Who knows? But you have to be marginalized. Oh, I'm sorry, guys. You're not marginalized. Well, that's subjective as shit. I can't argue with that. What? You have to be marginalized? And then here we come. In the next 30 seconds, you're going to hear Linda Witt, what I call the Mickey George oops, which you'll hear in tomorrow's explanation. And then Vern explains why these rules are racist. So, or separatist, or prejudice, bigoted. Here we go.
Any questions or thoughts?
In 30 seconds. 10 more seconds. Here we go,
Alderman
Linda.
Witt.
So what exactly qualifies someone to be marginalized, a part of the marginalized?
That's a good question, Linda. That
It's
is
just,
That is a very good question. Linda Witt, I don't get along with Linda. Like, we butt heads all the time. And we get along. We butt heads all the time. So we get along because, like, the very next day, it's almost like, just, like, wipe the slate clean because that's Linda. I mean, you just You call her a liar in a meeting, and she'll invite you out for a drink the next day. Like, I like that. I like that. That's the one thing I got to give Linda. And here I will not argue with her on what is marginalized. It is a subjective thing, and it meets today's woke agenda. Will it meet tomorrow's woke agenda? Did it meet last week's woke agenda? Who knows? Because every day it freaking changes. What meets marginalized? And that's where Mickey George will tear her apart. Well, tries to tear her apart in the next council meeting, which we've also have notes on, which we won't be doing tonight because it's getting a little late. So let's proceed. Let's see what Linda brings us.
Already underserved, and how do people qualify for that?
I mean, it's pretty much it. The goal was to, the purpose is to try to figure out how to word this thing. The purpose is to try to get people on the board that are, as I say, most effective. The board should not consist of, which is what we feared what would happen if the mayor appointed. We would end up with doctors, lawyers, PhDs, doctorates throughout this whole entire thing, and that's not.
You guys want to know what my opinion is on that statement? No, I'm sure. If you're watching this channel, you probably already know. So, God forbid the mayor appoints a doctor or a lawyer, because, I don't know. I'm a doctor. I don't know about Dr. Martin Luther King, but gee willikers, I feel like he would be excluded because doctors are not marginalized in today's standards. And that's really where the point gets. It's subjective. It's like, who's making these subjective determinations? Like, I guess it's the mayor of the day. And so guess what? When it isn't Bill Aleo, it will be whoever wins the next election, or the election after that, or the election after that, or the election after that. And then it's just, it's always whoever wins an election gets to pick. Guess what? Hoo-ha's, like, you guys don't get it. Like, nobody gets it. It's subjective. What is subjective? You're canceled today and you're not tomorrow, or you're not canceled the other day, or we'll go back 20 years to cancel your ass. Like, bye-bye, see ya. Like, you guys don't seem to get this. Anyways, I'm trying to think how to say this without coming off as racist, but we don't want doctors and lawyers and even people that pick themselves up by their bootstraps. We don't want them. We want people that are getting arrested. We want people that get arrested. Why? Why do we want people that get arrested to review the police department? Well, because they're marginalized. Why? Well, because rich people don't get arrested. Because rich people became doctors and lawyers and don't sell crack. Rich people rich people aren't like swindling little old ladies like with door-to-door scams. Or if Nigerians live down the block from you, you don't think their asses would have gotten arrested? No, they live in Nigeria, so you can't arrest them for this is the IRS, and I've got your social security number. Send me $100,000 via like Western Union money orders. Like, oh shit, it's the IRS. People are always going to take advantage of stupid people. But guess what? Like, that doesn't make the guy who's being arrested marginalized. He's marginalized. Yeah, everybody's marginalized. I'm marginalized when I stub my toe. Out of all the people that stubbed their toe that day, I am marginalized. Because I stubbed my toe. I checked the box. But guess what? I don't know. We can hem and haw about the subjectiveness of this all day.
Effective. They're not the marginalized community. They're
This is where it starts to segregate.
So if we know that some will end up on the board, that's not the issue. That's why we try to set it to where the Olean would pick 2 from each ward, and then from there, the board is self-sustained to get their replacements. But yeah, I think that was pretty much the idea, was to try to get people that were under that umbrella, you know, to try to avoid getting all these professionals into a position that, a perfect example, just say, you know, if John and I, you know, I would be someone that was marginalized, someone that was most affected. John has already mentioned that he has not had an experience to where he could buy.
I have called out Alderman Robinson on his marginalized status. Why is he marginalized? Is it because of the color of his skin? It shouldn't be. You shouldn't be marginalized because of the color of your skin. I'm called a racist because of the color of my skin. I've told him that he's not marginalized, and I've been like, every time I argue this point, we argue back to back. He makes like $75,000 a year. Guys at National Grid come to me to gripe about it. Like, oh, I'm sorry, if you didn't know, Alderman Robinson works at National Grid. He's like the gunnery sergeant. He's the guy that like makes sure that like shit's in the warehouse. If you need munitions, they're there. He's got them. Boom. Like, that's his job. He doesn't know anything about it. He doesn't do the electrical services or anything like that. He doesn't work the trucks. He doesn't fix the trucks. He just makes sure that like if they're selling a lot of like, you know, transformers and shit like that, they're going up on poles. Like, he's always making sure they've got the ample amount of inventory based on the demand. Which in and of itself is a complicated job, but shit, he makes more than I do. And like, I mean, it's salary comparison. Like, him alone makes me marginalized. I mean, like, that's like, you know, like, I didn't serve for the military, and I'm not griping against him for serving for the military. But if you're a marginalized person, if the military wouldn't accept you if the world was racist, right? Like, he served the military. He served in the military, right? There's a lot of people that serve in the military, and I don't fucking gripe against them. But I would just want to point out these little tidbits. Like, he's marginalized, but John Crawford isn't. But how does he know the roots of John Crawford? Is it because he's white? I mean, Vernon grew up in D.C. What does that mean? Like, there's more shootings in D.C. There's more shootings in African American culture in D.C. Like, yeah, okay, so maybe he's got a point, but like, there's a lot of the shootings in Olean are like a 50-50 split, like, if not even 50-50. Like, most of the shootings in Olean, like, they're white people, because guess what? Olean has a higher population of white people, and so John Crawford is from a marginalized community then, right? I mean, did Vernon grow up in a bad neighborhood? Like, oh, but, last time I asked that question, I was told to read his book, and I said, well, you put it on Audible, I'll listen to it. But he hasn't. I don't have time to read books. I have a public to serve. I work 40 hours a week now. I still keep my old clients happy, and I keep you folks happy. So subscribing, liking, and giving you a reason to write hate mail. So with that said, we're hitting a minute and an hour and 8 minutes on the charts, and an hour and 10 minutes on the charts, and you guys hate me, which is fine. Or you love me. It is what it is. But I have time to listen to books and council meetings and things like that. I don't have time to read books. So I don't know about Vernon's past, but I also don't know about John's past. So, like, to make the assumption that John is less marginalized than Vernon based on skin color sounds pretty racist to me. But let's give Alderman Robinson the benefit of the doubt.
Anything to say anything, but yet he would be, you know what I mean, if he's selected for the board, you know, he's someone that we would say, no, not the right person. So, and I remember Alderman Anastasia said that he hasn't had any run-ins or anything, so, you know, if someone like him was selected, then it would be a no. You know, so, and that's where we wanted to try to get people who didn't lean one way or another, but, you know, and that's why we had the writing in here, one of the members, actually the DA, suggested some of the wording in that particular paragraph to try to make sure that everyone had the mindset that they'd be coming in and holding up to a certain standard.
So I sat on that committee until I resigned, at which point I was not a part, but I listened to every single meeting that they had that was publicized on Zoom, and I read through all the foilable minutes, but they didn't keep minutes for certain ones, and we'll get into that in the next coming section. But it's funny that they didn't ask for any give and take on this presentation when I was there. They presented Vernon, Ty Malone, I believe Mickey George tried to jump on the bandwagon, and one or two others presented one or two others that weren't on the committee tried to present this document that's being presented to the Common Council right now, and the police chief and the other representative from the police force, Marsfelder, and Greg Carey went to their union and said, listen, let's find out what they have, and let's see what we can produce that meets our requirements for our union contract. And they came up with a 2-page document, which we'll find out in the next meeting, which should also be available online, I believe, on the city's website. If not, you can reach out to the mayor's office, and they will give you a copy of that. And this was like an 8-page, 10-page document, and theirs was like a 2-page document, and everyone was like, oh, it's only 2 pages. Well, guess what? It complies with the union contract. You can't defy the union contract. It doesn't meet this one. It doesn't meet the last union contract. It doesn't meet the next union contract. You're not going to get the union to sign off on something that says it can continue to penalize officers, because otherwise you'll never have officers, unless that's your goal. And that's really what we're pointing out here today, is their goal is to not have officers, because officers must be racist. Even black officers. Look at Brandon Tatum. He's been called an Uncle Tom. I love listening to Brandon Tatum. But he's not from New York, so I can't use him as a reference, I guess. Oh, by the way, PragerU. But anyways, but they talk about this, and they never presented this, and then they never asked for any advice. Well, one of the members made this particular adjustment. I don't remember that ever going on, unless it was behind the scenes. And that's really where we're critiquing stuff, because how many of these members were meeting behind the scenes? And I heard some rumors. I heard some rumors. There was 6 members of this committee, and there was there's 32 members of this committee, or some crazy number, because of the state recommendation on how many members should be part of it, regardless of your population size. And then there was also the Diversity and Inclusion Committee, which got started, which was 7 members with 7 stand-ins, or 7 substitutes, and then they finally got, it was just this big hullabaloo, and a bunch of those members were meeting with members of this committee and writing this thing. But we're gonna jump ahead here to the 17-minute mark, 17.5-minute mark, and then I gotta piss. I mean, it'll happen. You get me sitting here for an hour or so, slamming back beers. You guys, news over beers, and there's no Paul here, so I don't have to explain anything to him.
And just kind of, and then go back and look at this.
Oh, let me go back and look at
You
this.
might see things a little differently, or shed a light on something you're not sure of.
Now that I've copies of the minutes, I want to be able to
I think,
digest those before we come back.
I think the minutes would be helpful too. Yeah.
They're getting ready to close up shop, folks.
There
5
are
minutes
minutes
left.
in the back of the binder, however, they're only the minutes that were in person, not Zoom minutes. I can see you next week if we should go get the rest of the minutes.
Yeah, that was because the ones where we met in person were the ones where we discussed strictly this CRD.
Boom. right there, right after I had left, they had started meeting in person because some of the members didn't feel comfortable speaking online because they were worried that their employment, their business would be threatened. A couple of them actually said, Kevin, I'm about to leave. And then I spoke up at those meetings and they didn't leave. But then they watched me get brutalized and they were like, I'm out in 2 meetings and I'm leaving. Like they saw how one-sided this was, how like a group of people could bully another group of people, volunteers from our community, right? And then there were certain people that were like not trying to threaten their business, so they were like wishy-washy, and a bunch of them didn't want to meet. They didn't want to meet. They wanted to meet not on Zoom but in person. And then like when minutes were being recorded, they couldn't be recorded by the mayor's. The mayor's secretary, Michiko, would bring like a tape recorder so she could like, dictate the meetings, the minutes afterwards. And they wouldn't let her even record. They wouldn't let it be filmed. They wouldn't let anything happen. And so she was taking minutes. They were like, listen, it's a government meeting. I have to take minutes. And so they took minutes, and I feel like they missed a lot of things. I feel like a lot of things were exempted from these meetings because they were not being recorded, they were not being filmed as much as people knew that they were in the limelight. And which is to say one thing or another, but like, people on my side or not people on my side, right? Like people on my side or Vernon's side, right? Like, but there was like, you saw some of those police reform committees, like Ty Malone was ready to reach through the monitor and beat the shit out of the police chief. And Marzi, he wanted to just reach through and beat the daylights out of him. And like, from all accounts, from people I spoke to that were at those meetings, he was very docile in person. And people that were less willing to speak on camera were more willing to talk about their issues with this board being adverse, and then speaking with them in what the final draft of the CRB was, they say that it's not aligned with what's from the minutes and what was there. And like, the minutes don't say what they said in the minute. Like, there's a lot of things that were omitted. And I'm not saying that I'm not blaming Michiko and I'm not blaming the mayor's office. I just think that there was a lot that was said at these meetings. Then with her hands tied, not allowed to record because they wouldn't meet or speak, like they were holding the meetings hostage. And I think that there was a lot that was not said or done about these meetings. I think that people need to know about that. I think that how this document came about, or even just like what was in the minutes, reflect things that don't regard what was said, like how this document got created. So just something to think about. I mean, they had 2 or 3 different meetings where they met in person after I had resigned. And I would like to know why they had to meet in person. I mean, I don't know. I don't have to know why. I know why. People don't want to speak in person or on Zoom. They're worried about their businesses. They're worried about their jobs. They're also worried about being called a Marxist, right? Like, some people want to be pushed. And actually nowadays, people don't have to worry about being called a Marxist. People don't want to be considered not a Marxist and not woke. They don't want to lose their business over that. And
That's from all the previous where we were on Zoom is from Reform, so that was the
yeah,
whole,
and
we didn't
I watched every Zoom meeting.
specifically.
And
So these would
that
be helpful
document
for us
couldn't have
to
been
go through.
crafted
Yes.
As it
in
pertains
any of
just
the
to
Zoom
the
meetings.
Yes.
Speaking to people that showed up in person,
Yeah, these
there's
minutes
no
are
way
strictly
that document could have been
the
crafted from those people, which was like 75% of that committee.
Okay.
So, go figure, right?
We got our homework,
It's
any other?
always
comments or
25% to rule them all, right?
I do have one, I'm trying to find it here, but just, there has been a repeal of,
And then there,
Chief, do you remember, is it, what is it, 50, is that a repeal of,
they're talking about a repeal of something, some foilable ability for something or other with police files if they were discharged from something or other. So, but I mean, essentially, you guys got the gist of it. Thanks for watching. We're going to review a couple others tomorrow, and we will see you guys on the flip-flop. Don't forget to send your hate mail, and don't forget to send your love letters and everything else that you guys like to send us. Flaming dog shit on my porch. I love it. You love it. We all love it. Don't forget, news over beers. Boys and girls, we'll catch you on the next tune-off.